I'm Meredith Blackwell, and I'm here at the International Mycological Congress number 11 in Puerto Rico, San Juan. And this is José Dianese, who works with rust fungi. He's from Brazil. And he's going to talk to us and tell us a little bit about how he became a mycologist and the part of Brazil where he works, because it's different from what most of us think about, and something about rust fungi in Brazil.
Yes.
José, and am I saying your name correctly?
José, yes.
Yeah, José.
Yes. José.
But not Jose. There are many Joses around.
Not José, but you spell the same way.
Yes, and it causes confusion.
Causes confusion, that's right. Well, I think this is a great opportunity and a great honor that I have being interviewed by you. And I would like to start by saying something about my personal life, my origin and so on. My family, on my father's side, my grandparents came from Italy, from southern Italy, during a very, very bad time where Italy was having a real problem on the 1900s. Actually, my grandfather came to Brazil in 1900, and my grandmother with an aunt came 5 years later, all by boat, and that thing would take them 1 month traveling from Italy to Brazil. And he was a shoemaker. And most Italians in Brazil that came to Brazil, they went to São Paulo, which was a rich state. But somehow a group of families that came out of this small village in southern Italy called Pichota, they went to the state of Minas Gerais, which was poorly developed state by that time.
It's further north of Amazonia?
No, it's south.
It's very south.
In central Brazil.
Okay.
And they were located there, and my grandfather, I didn't know him, my grandmother either, because he died early, and when my father got married, a few years later he was dead, and I was not born yet. On my mother's side, she was the daughter, the youngest daughter of a big family. My grandfather, her father, he was a rich man, and he had farms and a lot of money, and he used to lend money to people. He was kind of a small bank.
Okay.
Anyway, she was well off, but she married a little bit late. She was 31 when she got married. And
not these days. It wouldn't be considered late.
No. Yes, by that time, yes. And what happens was that she when she got married, after my grandfather died, they split the things we had, and she got a little bit, a small piece of land. And my father, he never worked in agriculture because he was the son of a shoemaker, and he himself was a shoemaker, and there was he had to leave our small town and move to the place where my mother lived because of the politics. They kind of persecuted him in the 1930s, and he had to move to this other town.
So at first he had to move from Italy, or your grandfather?
Yeah, my grandfather.
And then your father?
And then my father had to migrate from one town to the next.
Yeah.
And in this new town, namely Santo Antônio do Monte in the state of Minas Gerais, is right on the center of the Cerrado of the Brazilian savanna. And he went to this small farm. It didn't work well, so he sold it, and he got a small business, a small food store in town. and he was doing well. But when he was 42 years old, he got sick. By that time, it was a serious matter because he had a thyroid condition, a hyperthyroidism, and he could not be treated there. So, he was 42, and I was I was 9 years old when he became sick. My father, my parents, they never had a house for themselves, except for this thing in the little farm. And then one thing I made sure, and that I'm proud of doing it, was that whenever I graduate and I got some money, I bought them in a small house. I'm very happy I did that.
Yeah.
So my family history is a mixture of different ethnies, as practically everybody in Brazil. It's very interesting because when I got married, my wife, she is the granddaughter of an slave. So my grandchildren, it's a very nice segregation. I have a daughter who has a darker skin and dark eyes and dark hair. And then the other son, he's very clear skin, but black hair and dark eyes. And the youngest one has blue eyes and has a darker skin. It's very interesting.
So diversity in your family.
Completely diverse, as is in Brazil. Brazil, I think the greatest thing about Brazil is the real mixture that we have there. Real mixture. If you trying to pull who has, you have not pure race there, except for little small enclaves in the south, where you still have German origin community, Ukrainians, and so on. The Italians, they mixed completely in Brazil.
Well,
it's very interesting.
And all over
All
South
over.
America. I was, we've talked to several people here from South America, not Brazil, but other countries.
Anyway, well, I was born in the Cerrado. I remember when I was a child, the big industry in the area there was the people collecting, harvesting the trees, the barbatimão trees, which is a stiphnodendron barbatimão, because they take the bark of the tree to loads of barks to use on the leather industry because of the tanning. That was, they finish up with huge areas of Cerrado after that thing. But I didn't realize by that time, I was just a child, how important was that for the environment. It was very bad. So I stayed in this small town until I was 11 years old, and then we moved to the original town where my father was born, because he got sick and we had relatives there, and you know, these Italian relatives, they all
they help.
They help. So we moved to this a little bit larger town, because where I was born was really a small village. We didn't have any drainage system, and when it rains, the water would run on the street, you know, and we had floods, and we had a very poor electric system by that time. And I remember that one thing that we liked to play with was with electricity, because the poles on the streets, they were made out of steel from the railway tracks. They stick those things to put the lights, and always leaked some electricity in there. So
you could touch
it and have a line. And if you go by and I touch your nose, that thing hurts.
That reminds me, kids in the United States that live in the northern part, they will try to make people put their tongue on ice in the winter time, and it kind of seems like a similar kids game.
So that was very common.
So did you see mushrooms there with all the water running through the streets? It sounds
No.
damp. No mushrooms.
No, because in the Cerrado, mushrooms are not very common.
But no puffballs or anything?
No,
No
no.
fungi?
Lots of fungi that are plant associated.
But
by that
did you
time,
see them as a child?
by that time, no.
No. I never saw one until I was in college.
That's right.
Never noticed a fungus.
Never. So I moved to this other town, and thing was very difficult. We always living in rented houses and so on, and very bad situation. And my father, he got a surgery in 1953, and he came out of the surgery in very bad shape. He has a tracheotomy, and he lived with that for 15 years.
Oh my gosh.
And he worked during all this time. He was a, how do I say it? He used to travel selling things.
A traveling salesman?
Driving sales, and he would sell things that were very heavy. What was articles for shoemakers and people who make saddles,
Okay.
horse saddles. So they have all those metal things and hammers and so on, and that was very heavy. And he would travel by train mainly. And once I was in my house, and somebody called me. I was 14-year-old by that time, and said that he was in bad shape at the train station because he returned and he could not walk home. So I went there, and this thing that he used, he was broken. So he could not even take the air in. He was in very bad shape. So I got a small horse, how do you call that horse?
Burro?
Horse car.
A horse carriage?
Yes.
A cart?
Yeah. And we put him in there and took him home, and later to the hospital to fix that. That was a very bad thing that I cannot forget.
But he recovered from it.
He recovered, and a few years later, I went in 1957. I left home on myself. I was 17, and I went to Viçosa to study agronomy, and then I spent my 4 years there. I was very successful. I never knew how good I was in school, because we actually didn't have a good evaluation system.
So wait, you went to school and stayed there 40 years? In school? In
school, yes.
The same school?
The same.
But you were no longer a student?
No.
Okay.
I was I did the high school there, and during my high school I had to make some money, so I used to teach mathematics to the children of the rich people in town. So that would give me some help. So when I was 17, I finished my high school and I went to the university.
Oh, okay.
It was very, very bad, because the course I had was accounting.
Bookkeeping?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I decided to go to an agronomy school, and I could not compete for the school because my diploma was not good enough. So I had to take 3 examinations in another school, in mathematics, physics, and biology. So I passed those things, and then I competed, and we had a good competition, and I was successful. For me, it was a surprise that I have never been evaluated before. So I entered school and got a BS in agronomy. But before going to the university, there was a man who really was responsible for waking me up in terms of science. And he was the one who showed us that chemistry was important, that biology had a meaning, and so on. He was a medical doctor. He was a guy who was all by himself. He did not associate with many people, but he liked the students. So we had about 10 students that he picked up from classroom, and he gave us all the inspiration. And all these people professionally were very successful. 3 of them got PhD in this country and became good scientists in their respective areas. Yeah. Anyway, this man, his name is Flávio Oliveira Moraes. The first fungus I described, I named after him. Fleosporella Flávio Moraes.
Okay.
So I went to the university, I graduated, and then there I met another man who was very important in my life, Professor Geraldo Martins Chaves. He came to Cornell and he studied under Wetzel. And he developed a research and wrote a thesis that he did not show it, he did not present it in Cornell, but he went to Brazil and he competed to become a professor using that thesis, and he won the
Do you know who he worked with at Cornell?
Wetzel.
Wetzel. Oh,
Yes.
my gosh.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Wetzel had many students in mycology.
Oh, yes. And he was very influential because I was very agitated, very. I had the idea by that time that communism was a great thing, and I was a leftist, active student, and I became labeled for that. And then in 1964, when the military took over, they picked up those guys who were supposed to be the leadership of the left wings at the university, and they had us in front of 3 military, and they want to know what we were up to and so on and so forth. So I had this experience, but fortunately this professor and other professors in the university, they kind of said, wow, this is something student, you don't know. So I came through the inquiry without a bad stamp.
Yeah.
I was lucky. And by that time, in 1964, I already had made my mind that I had to come to the States for a PhD, because I thought that that was the thing to do, because I like science. I have to go to the place where things really happen. I was convinced. It's amazing how I became convinced, because at that university in Viçosa, they had a tradition of sending people abroad for PhDs.
So where did you go?
Because the founder of the school was an American, P.H. Rolfs, who was a professor of fruit crops in Florida.
Okay.
He was hired by the president of the country in 1927 to build this school.
And he was still there in the 50s? No, he was no longer there.
But his daughter was, Miss Clarissa. She took care of our nutrition, she took care of the restaurant, and she was a very nice person. And P.H. Rolfs, he created a school on the exactly following the American model.
Yeah.
And he had this mentality of sending people abroad for training and so on and so forth, in such a way that I had very good teachers by that time. So we had for example, he had there a man who was a Russian soil specialist. And this guy was a tremendous teacher, very good teacher. The chemistry was a German who had been in the war and had a broken leg in the war, but very good chemistry, Walter Bruni. And all the people in there, they were people trained in the US. They had at least a master's degree. So that is a different mentality in Brazil. That's today it's a famous university, Universidade Federal de Viçosa. It's a big university.
So
now.
did you get your PhD there?
No. You see what happened? In 1964, I was doing my master's degree there, And then there was the plant pathology professor. He was the guy who founded that thing. That thing did not exist. He was all by himself, and then he hired 4 people. I was one of the 4. And I was the second to get a master's degree there in microbiology, but applied microbiology because it was in plant pathology. Yeah. So I had this master's degree, but and I became a sort of an assistant professor working with him. Then I decided to drop the job, and I went to another job because I want to be free to come to the States as soon as possible. And I got this other job, and I applied for a PhD in Puerto University. I was accepted. They even sent me a picture of the lady who was going to meet him in the airport. Very good-looking lady. I said, "Oh, beautiful, let's go to Puerto." And then I was sitting in my lab, working in Belo Horizonte now, in the new job. And all of a sudden come in this tall American, young fellow, all very reddish color, and start talking to me. He said, "Well, I'm here on an International Ford Foundation Fellowship to work in international agriculture." And they sat me in a table at the Secretary of Agriculture, and I'm sitting there doing nothing. And I wonder if I could work with you, because I am a field physiologist, field plant physiologist. I worked with William Williams, was a professor at UC Davis. I said, "Okay, no problem. If you want to come, I'm working on this pineapple disease. And if you want to do the mineral nutrition of the pineapple, this is going to be beautiful because we can correlate the results with our field work with the disease." And he helped me a lot on the field. He was very hard worker, very strong man. And we became like brothers. His name is Robert Michaels Burns. He was a doctor. He was the son of a doctor, a medical doctor at Woodland, close to Davis. Then he said, "Oh, you are not going to Purdue?" I said, "Why not? I want to go to Purdue." I said, "No, you are going to Davis." I said, "How come I'm going to Davis?" "Yes, I'm going to Davis. You just wait." So he asked his professor for the forms. I applied, and then that's how I went to Davis, thanks to Mike. So when I arrived in Davis, I was the first Brazilian ever to be in that department. I was the first one to get a PhD there. It was quite a great experience. I owe a lot to UC Davis.
Who was your professor?
My professor was Bob Webster.
Okay.
Yes. But I have the great help from Jim DeVay. I don't know if you know. Jim DeVay was such a nice person, and he gave me big help. So I went through the PhD in Davis, and I went back to Brazil. And by that time, a PhD in Brazil was really valued, were rare. And
what had you worked on? Breast expansion?
No, I worked on Ceratocystis fimbriata, mineral nutrition of Ceratocystis fimbriata. It was a nice thing, but I didn't like at the end. I didn't like very much my thesis, as usual. I don't think many people don't. But still, I have good data on the mineral nutrition of Ceratocystis, because the fungus is very strange. It responds to calcium in high concentration. Nobody ever used this data to explore it further.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting. Anyway, I got the PhD and I went back to Brazil. By that time was in 1970. I was 30 years old, exactly 30 years old. I went back and I had 11 job offers.
Wow.
So I got one of them, went there and tried, and then it didn't work out, and I finally moved to Brasilia. Brasilia by that time was run by a military, and then when you say, "Wow, he's a military," but he was a military with a PhD in physics from MIT. he had the brains. He was very intelligent and very competent and very honest, a good administrator. But he was a military, so people didn't like the military. But personally, he was a tremendous guy. He's probably the smartest guy I have ever met. He wanted to build a university in Brazil following the MIT model. So I arrived there, started working, and applied for 2 grants, and I got the grants. Started working, doing a lot of noise in the department, and then all of a sudden the dean of the institute decided to leave the university. And then they said, well, we have to have somebody to replace the dean. And then the chairman of my department, he's a very well-known biochemist in Brazil, biophysics. And he came to me and said, well, I'm going to suggest you to be the dean of the institute. I said, well, I'm very green. I was, by that time, it was in 1972. I was 32 years old. I not even have published 1 paper from my thesis by that time. I said, well, you go. I said, well, depends. So the president of the university called me, and I went to talk to him. And I said, well, I can take it because I like to work, and this is a challenge. But I need support for 2 things. I want to build a department of ecology and a group in plant pathology. I said, well, I will support you, but you have to go after money. I said, no problem. So I took the job, and I started working. And I spent 6 years wearing coat and tie. That was very bad. So I started my career upside down. And then,
you were too young to be a dean.
Too young to be a
So
dean.
what about your research program?
No, that's what I'm going to tell you. So what I did during the 6 years I was a dean.
Well, we're kind of running out of time.
Oh, okay.
So I want to hear about the fungi in Brazil.
I'll be fast.
Okay.
So as a dean, what I did, I got a project approved, and I brought 3 people from UC Davis to put together the plant pathology group. And then we started the department. We were 4 from UC Davis and 4 from Brazil. And this was a major success. And the department is still there.
And were they permanent? The people
Yes.
from Davis came and stayed?
They came and stayed 10 years. And then they returned after 10 years. And at the same time, I applied for a big grant to build an ecology department. I got $1 million grant. This was very surprising. And then I brought a group from Scotland, from Edinburgh.
But what about the fungi? You're not telling me about. No, we don't have much time. We're running out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the ecology department was built too. Then after I finished that, I went to the lab and started working. But I was mainly working with plant pathology. I worked with eucalyptus wilt, eucalyptus rust, and I worked with pineapple gummosis, which is a very important disease. I worked with disease on grapes and so on, very wide range. And finally, in 1993, I had a student who I had to take over the teaching of mycology for the graduate course because the mycologist left, one of the guys from Davis. So I started teaching, and then the students started bringing me things from the Cerrado, fungi from the Cerrado, because they had to build a collection during the course. And I could not identify most of the fungi. That's where I became interested in the fungi. So we start by publishing some coelomycetes and so on. And I had several students, one after the other, working with fungi. And at the end of a few years, we had about 150 species described associated with the native plants. And some of them, for example, I have 2 genera of rust fungi, which were new to science. Until 2003, we had only one fungus described by Brazilian in Cummins and Hiratsuka Illustrated Journal. And during the new edition, the 2 or 3 edition, I added 2 more.
Okay.
So that was a great.
Is that the Cummins?
Cummins and Hiratsuka.
Yeah.
I have 2 genera there that.
And the
we
second one, he
describe.
called that son of Rust genera.
That's right.
Cummins did.
So that was a good thing for us because we really gave a good contribution. And Hiratsuka was a key person for that because he talked to me several times and he stimulated me a lot.
Now, when I first knew you, I think in Regensburg, maybe, were you involved with IMA? Because you were on the council
I was in
or on the.
I became the first time I went to IMA Congress was in Canada in 1994.
Yeah, that was my first too. No,
So,
my second.
From that Congress came out a book that Kevin Hyde edited, a book on the microfungi, the tropical microfungi.
Oh, I don't know that book.
It's well, and I had a chapter on the Cerrado fungi. I put together all the information. I listed all the species known for the Cerrado because Batista contributed a lot to that, and also Viegas. Viegas even had a big paper in Bragantia, all treating exclusively the fungi from the Cerrado. So actually in the Cerrado you have a big inspiration to study fungi because every plant in the Cerrado, they have always associated with it at least a rust fungus and a cercosporoid fungus. It's something you see that really makes you be excited about. And I felt in the Cerrado the same way Batista felt, because felt in relation to mycodiversity in Brazil as a whole. And Batista, he would go after the fungi, plant-associated fungi, wherever they were. And he described many, he had about 7,000 papers.
Yeah, I remember seeing all those.
Yes, and
Well,
so
José,
he was an inspiration.
It's been really interesting to talk to you and learn something about your history and mycology in Brazil. So
Well,
I appreciate it very much.
I thank you very much for the
Okay.
honor.